So we are concluding our conference. The large number of participants and the intensive discussions showed how important and urgent the problem is, which we discussed. Judicial independence and separation of power are cornerstones of our democratic constitutional state. We have always said that these cornerstones shouldn't be taken for granted. Or as Professor Nussberger put it, to be independent and to appear to be independent is not given once and for all. It is something that the courts re-established with every of their rulings. So the problem is that we lose trust faster than we gain it. Particularly in the last few years, we've realized that the situation can change dramatically in a short amount of time, and that a democratic constitutional state in an extreme case can turn into a majority dictatorship. The VDEM Institute from the University of Göteborg stated in its Democracy Report 2020 that the autocratization, which is the decline of democracy in states, accelerates all over the world. For the first time since 2001, autocracies are the majority, 92 countries. Almost 35% of the world population live in autocracies. That's 2.6 billion people. The EU has its first non-democracy as a member state. Hungary is now assessed as an authoritarian electoral regime. In its 2021 report, the VDEM Institute states that the global decline in the last 10 years is sharp and continues in 2020, particularly in the Asiatic Pacific region, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. The level of democracy for the average world citizen sunk to a level in 2020, which corresponds to the level in 1990. Let me remind you that that was just before the fall of the Iron Curtain. The liberal democracies shrinked from 41 countries to 32 countries in the last decade, with a proportion of the world population of 40%. Eastern European states such as Hungary, Poland, Serbia are continuing their downward trend after continuing attacks on the judicial system and restrictions for media and civil society. In its Liberal Democracy Index, the VDEM Institute states cornerstones of the constitutionality, like equality before the law, individual freedoms, restrictions of the jurisdiction, and of the executive, and so on. This index in Turkey shrank from 0.46 in 2009 by 0.35 points to 0.11 in 2020. Turkey, as well as Hungary and Serbia, is now assessed as an authoritarian electoral regime. In Hungary, the index also fell by 0.39 points to 0.37, in Poland by 0.35 points to 0.49, and in Serbia by 0.28 points to 0.24. The Democracy Barometer of the University of Zurich and the Center for Democracy in Aarau shows similar developments. Between 2000 and 2016, the average index in the EU fell from 62.98 to 54.73 points. It is interesting that in the older EU states, it fell more sharply than in the new member states, namely from 75.35 to 65.42 points. So that's only slightly higher than the average in 2000. And then we have the Transformation Index of the Bertelsmann Foundation. This measures the separation of powers, judicial independence, prosecution of office bearers who misuse their positions, and so on. the current index 2020 shows a problematic balance for the last decade, where because the separation of powers was weakened in 60 states, for example, in Poland, Romania, Serbia. So that's about the current developments in Europe. If you look at what is happening in Europe, but also if we consider the political polarization of politics in Switzerland too. In Switzerland, we cannot trust that will go well in the future just because it went well in the past. If there are members of parliament who say that Switzerland is a dictatorship, this is only politics. But such statements, but also punishments by not re-electing judges or office bearers, this is something we need to take seriously because they are a sign of an increasing polarization and popularization of politics in Switzerland too. In daily newspapers, it was stated that saying that Switzerland is a dictatorship is a breach of taboo. And Ms. Sanders said it right. Even if the system traditionally worked well in Switzerland, these boundaries can break very quickly in an increasingly polarized political world. The discussions and speeches today showed that we are not helpless when it comes to these developments. Our state and national and supranational institutions have the opportunities to take measures, and they have begun to do so. I would like to point to the very bad situation in Turkey here. What is also needed is the commitment of the civil society, NGOs, and the support of science, because they need to call for the rule of law and the separation of power and independent judiciary. We also need the circumstances so that judicial independence, separation of power, and the rule of law can persist even if they are subject to pressure. This is particularly important if you consider the fact that the autocratization of states always follows a similar pattern. First, the ruling parties attack the media and the civil society, then they polarize the society, then they disregard opponents, and then they distribute false information and undermine formal institutions. Today's conference made a contribution to the commitment of science, NGOs, and civil society. Thank you very much for that. Above all, the speakers who very spontaneously confirmed their participation, for example, with the remark that this topic is so important that they will definitely take their time to participate. Thank you very much. This conference wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you very much to Mr. Peter Übelsachs, who developed this idea together with me and my colleague and friend Stefan Breitenmoser, who, together with me and the Swiss Institute for the Judiciary, turned this idea into a reality. I would also like to thank the University of Basel, whose Faculty of Law underlined 2 years ago already how important the commitment for the rule of law, the separation of power, and the judicial independence is currently. With this first Basel conference on the judiciary, the oldest university of Switzerland sets a clear signal that in Switzerland too, and particularly in Switzerland, the constant commitment for this cornerstone of our democratic rule of law is important and is important. Our technical, I would like to thank very much to our technicians, Marin Conny and Mr. Kurat, and thank you, dear participants, that you have shown your interest in judicial independence, separation of power, and the rule of law, and that you commit yourself to their strengthening. Now I come to the conclusion of our conference. I hope that we will see each other again next year at the second Basel Conference on the Judiciary, including the speakers. And then I hope we will be able to meet in person and exchange our ideas personally. Thank you very much for your participation and have a nice evening. Stay healthy.